So, Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo is officially done, and today we're explaining the full timeline in the order that things actually happened. What this means is we're going to start in 2018, shortly after the original series, and then explain everything up until the end of Modulo. Okay, so following the events of the first JJK, the existence of curses was now public knowledge. In 2018, the Japanese government was forced to reveal this secret after Kenjaku released millions of cursed spirits in Tokyo. As you'd expect, this had a huge impact on society, with certain people wanting to change the Jujutsu regulations. For example, now that the whole planet knew about cursed energy, one proposal was to turn sorcerer fights into a public spectacle, similar to boxing. Sadly, in the end, things didn't go that far, but the higher-ups did add a new rule, which they called the Hakari provision. Under this rule, a person could now hire Jujutsu sorcerers to fight each other, and the only condition is that the sorcerers need to be approved by Jujutsu HQ. In other words, Hakari's fight club was now perfectly legal as long as the fighters were known by the Jujutsu higher-ups. Another big change was the downfall of the big clans, with the Kamo clan and Zenin clan becoming completely irrelevant. As we know, the Zenin clan was wiped out by Maki, who got no jail time by the way, and in Modulo, nothing was done to restore them to their former glory. Meanwhile, the Kamo clan was a mess thanks to everything Kenjaku did, which left the Gojo clan as the only stable family. Even though Satoru was killed in the fight against Sukuna, the family made a strategic move by appointing Yuta as the next clan head. At the time, Yuta was the strongest living sorcerer, and so by having him in charge, it meant the Gojos would still have a seat at the table. It also helps that Yuta and the Gojos are descended from the same sorcerer, so they are technically related even if it is very distant. The last thing to say about this period of time is that Tengen died at the end of JJK, and this was bad because Tengen's barriers were suppressing cursed spirits. Without these barriers, the number of curses would increase in the near future, especially now that people knew curses were real. In theory, this would lead to strong curses popping up all over the country. However, the government did do certain things to stop this. Number 1. When the government declared that curses were real, they lied and said that spirits only exist in Tokyo. This was done so that people's fear of curses would be directed to this one city, and according to Yuji, cursed energy from the entire planet began flowing into Tokyo. The end result was that the city was turned into a living hell, inhabited purely by cursed spirits. On the flip side, this meant that outside Tokyo, curses started appearing less and less, and so the role of Jujutsu sorcerers began to change. At first, they created barriers both inside and outside Tokyo to replace Tengen's barriers that would eventually disappear. In Kyoto, these new barriers were designed to scare curses away, so the way it works is that if a curse was to leave Tokyo, then this barrier would encourage it to just go back. One character even admitted that the new barriers don't trap spirits in Tokyo, it's more like they encourage the curses to just stay where they are. Besides that, at least once a year, sorcerers take part in the Great Purification Ritual, and the purpose of this is just to go into Tokyo and start massacring curses. Now, flashing forward to the year 2024, this is the year that a treaty was signed between Japan and the rest of the world. The name of this deal was the Kyoto Paranormal Security Treaty, aka the Paranormal Resolution, and it gave foreign countries access to the Jujutsu world. Under this deal, Japan had to agree to routine inspections, in which other countries would send their agents to Japan. These agents could then accompany sorcerers on missions to see what the Jujutsu world is all about, and it wouldn't surprise me if they had access to Jujutsu High as well. On top of that, the deal made Japan responsible for all paranormal threats, including obviously curses and anything else that might pop up. From this panel, we know that Japan wasn't happy about the treaty because it says that ever since the treaty was signed, Japan has been uncooperative on all issues. My personal guess is they were probably forced to sign it by the Americans, who were desperate to learn about cursed energy. Remember, during the Cullen Game, the Americans swooped in to kidnap sorcerers, and they did this since they thought that cursed energy could be an infinite energy source. At the end of JJK, Maki said she had plans to get those sorcerers back, so assuming that she didn't storm into Area 51 by herself, I'm assuming that the Americans gave the hostages back in exchange for Japan signing the treaty. Whatever the truth may be, the fact is that research into cursed energy continued for decades, and the main test subjects were Japanese people. On the black market, the Japanese were highly valued for their cursed energy, and human traffickers would sell them to be used in experiments. The first wave of kidnappings began in the years after the Cullen Game, but after a long time, the kidnappings became less and less. One reason for this is that research into cursed energy was unsuccessful because scientists couldn't figure out how to convert it into normal energy. Even after decades and decades of research, all they found was that curse energy is useful for powering curse techniques, and this caused the Japanese to become less valuable. Anyhow, moving on to the year 2031, this is the year that Yuta and Maki had their first and only child. At the age of 29, Maki gave birth to a son called Iori, who grew up to be not that strong. Despite having special grade superhuman parents, Iori was apparently not on that level, and later on this would genuinely make him insane. However, before we get into that, in the year 2035, something pretty tragic happened, which is that Panda stopped functioning. Thanks to Principal Yaga, we know that cursed corpses are supposed to have 3 separate cores, with each core containing something that's like a soul. Sadly, during the Culling game, 2 of Panda's cores were destroyed by Kashimo, and in 2035, he finally shut down. That same year, Yuta then stored Panda inside of the Gojo family warehouse, and from that moment, he officially became property of the Gojo clan. Now, in the year 2069, Iori Okkotsu was almost 40, and was depressed about the power level of sorcerers. Unlike Yuta's generation, where you had multiple special grades, Iori's generation lived in a time of peace, and I guess this caused their overall strength to drop off. In 2069, his wife then gave birth to a son named Tsurugi, and the important thing about Tsurugi is that he has no technique. For Iori, we have to assume that this was a huge disappointment, because just 1 year later, he abandoned his family. To be specific, in the year 2070, his wife was pregnant again, and this time Iori was desperate for a child who had a strong technique. At one point, he met with a mysterious hooded man, although the details of their conversation weren't fully revealed. All we know is that the 2 of them met on the Gojo family estate, and Iori was shouting at him about something. Based on the context though, I think it's fair to assume that he was looking for ways to improve the strength of the new generation. However, the hooded man replied by saying it doesn't matter, and as far as we know, that was the end of the conversation. Shortly after this, Iori's second child was born, and the name of this child was Yuka Okkotsu. Unlike her brother, Yuka was born with a curse technique, and it wasn't just any technique. Yuka was born with the 10 shadows. This was possible since both her dad and her grandmother have Zenin DNA, but what's crazy is that Iori vanished right after the birth. Considering he was desperate for a strong child, you'd think that he would stick around for a little bit to help train her or something, but no, he immediately dipped, and according to one person, he felt like his role had been fulfilled. To me, this doesn't make complete sense when we consider that Iori was a serious and diligent person. Because, for me, a serious and diligent person, they'd stick around to raise their own kids. If you have any theories on why he left, then let me know in the comments down below. But for me, I do think a binding vow might be involved, possibly a vow that guaranteed Yuka strength, but in exchange, he could never see his family again. Something along those lines would make a bit of sense. Regardless, 6 years after Iori's disappearance, his kids were doing just fine, with Yuta and Yuka having a close relationship. In 2076, he gave Yuka his special ring, the same ring that was given to him by Rika. Over the decades, Yuta turned this ring into an insanely powerful cursed object as he imbued it with his cursed energy over a long period of time. As a result, the ring contained a near infinite amount of CE, and it also contained Rika's will. For Yuta, he wanted the ring to watch over Yuka until she became a Jujutsu sorcerer, but unfortunately for Tsurugi, he didn't get anything. From the first chapter, it's clear that Tsurugi was closer to Maki, and when he told her about the ring, she told him that he didn't need one. Just like Maki, Tsurugi was born with a heavenly restriction, giving him above average physical stats in exchange for losing the cursed energy that he was supposed to have. Therefore, Maki thought he didn't need a ring since he was strong enough already, and this comment left a big impact on Tsurugi. 3 years later, Maki then died at the age of 77, and 1 year after that, Yuta passed away as well. At his funeral, you can see the chairs are all filled with family and friends, proving that Jujutsu society has changed a lot. Back in the day, sorcerers dying was just an expected part of the job, and most people didn't have the time or the desire to mourn their fallen comrades. In the future though, the culture is obviously a lot different, and part of the reason is because it's a time of peace, and another reason is that Gojo killed all the old higher-ups, allowing his allies to shape the future of the Jujutsu world. Anyway, following Yuta's death, for some reason the Gojo clan decided that Tsurugi should have the ring. By this point, Yuka had already had the ring for a few years, and so the decision to take it away from her had a big effect on both siblings. For Tsurugi, he thought it was a sign that the Gojo clan thought he was weak, because after all, Maki told him that he didn't need it. In his mind, he needed to get stronger to prove that the Gojo clan made a mistake, and one day, he planned to give it back to Yuka. Meanwhile, Yuka felt like they took it from her because Tsurugi is more powerful, and so she also started training in order to get it back. Now, this is where the timeline gets crazy because in the year 2084, very bad things were happening on an alien planet. The name of this alien planet is Simuria, and it's home to a humanoid race with 3 eyes known as the Simurians. In a different video, I broke down their entire history in more depth, but for today we're keeping it simple by focusing on the main conflict. For context, on Simuria there are multiple different tribes, and each tribe have their own warriors who are able to control cursed energy. In the Rumelian tribe, the role of a warrior is to protect women and children, whereas in the Diskunte tribe, the chief uses warriors to just take whatever he wants. One example is how about 10 years ago, the Diskunte attacked the Rumelians to steal their natural resources. Specifically, on Simuria there's a special type of rock called Mul, and Mul has the power to transform cursed energy into other forms of energy. Back on Earth, this is something that human scientists couldn't figure out how to do, so Mul is incredibly valuable. On the Rumelian land, they had a mine full of the stuff, and so the Diskunte rolled in, destroyed their homes, and forced the Rumelians to move to a barren wasteland. Meanwhile, the Diskunte made themselves rich, and to make things even worse, they convinced other tribes that the Rumelians deserved it. This is because on Simuria there are these animals known as Kallians who attack every tribe except the Rumelians. Just like cursed spirits, Kallians come in different shapes and sizes, and also like cursed spirits, they'll live forever unless someone kills them. The only thing that makes them different to curses is that Kallians have a solid physical body, so on Earth, the thing that's most similar to Kallians are actually the cursed womb death paintings. Anyway, in Rumelian culture, the Kallians are worshipped as gods, and the Rumelians refused to kill them even when the other tribes were wiping out their own Kallians. The Diskunte took advantage of this by starting a war that looked like a religious war about Kallians, but in reality the purpose of the war was to get rich from stealing the Mul. Ever since then, the Rumelians were isolated and struggled to survive in this brand new barren environment. However, in the Earth year 2084, things had gotten better for them thanks to a Rumelian called Dura. Over the years, Dura had been working on a huge project by himself as he dug through this giant piece of land. By doing this, he made a canal that went directly through the Rumelian land, and this canal had benefits for multiple tribes. For the Rumelians, it made their land more fertile and gave them access to clean water, and for the Diskunte, it allowed them to easily sail through to a place called Shama. When Dura began this project, he faced a ton of resistance from his own people because they couldn't understand why he'd do anything to help the Diskunte. Despite that, he kept on going with help from Maru and Cross, who were a pair of orphan twins that he took under his wing. During the war, their real parents were killed by the Diskunte, and since these kids were very powerful, Dura was the only one who could control them. Together, the 3 of them worked on the canal, but after a long time, the other Rumelians did join in to help. Once the project was done, it instantly improved relations between the 2 sides, and for the first time in a decade, they planned to start doing business. This was great news for the Rumelians since they desperately needed the money, but when everything was looking great, suddenly everything went to shit. One day, the Diskunte chief's daughter was killed by a Kallian, and once again, he used this as an excuse to steal from the Rumelians. On this occasion, he directly blamed them for his daughter's death, and as payment, he wanted 90% of their land, including the canal they had just built. The only way for the Rumelians to stop this was to take part in a 1v1 fight, because this is how arguments are resolved in Diskunte culture. On the Rumelian side, Dura was their strongest physical fighter, while on the Diskunte side, Deborah was a special grade warrior. Back in the day, Deborah and Dura actually used to be best friends, and so if Deborah had a choice, he wouldn't be here. Sadly, the chief put a death curse on his younger sister, meaning that if Deborah disobeys the chief, or if he kills the chief, then his sister will also die. Therefore, to save his sister, he had to fight Dura to the death, and without much effort, he killed his former best friend. Following this, the Rumelians were screwed, because soon the Diskunte would come to take their remaining land. In this situation, they had nowhere else to go, and everything seemed hopeless until Deborah showed up. It turns out that right before Dura's death, he told his friend about a gift that he'd left for the rest of his people. This gift was an enormous supply of premium mul that he uncovered through his digging over the years. In order to escape certain death, Maru and Cross combined this mul with their overpowered curse technique, and the name of their technique is Chaos and Harmony. If you're wondering what it does, the answer is it can do anything, and in this case, it constructed a spaceship made of mul. This ship was big enough to house the 50,000 Rumelians, and it's powered entirely by cursed energy. For context, on Simuria, their tech is about 100 or 200 years behind humans, so having a spaceship isn't something they see at all. Before they hopped on board, Dabura offered to join them, because right before he killed Dura, he made a promise to protect the Romelians. For the next 2 years, the spaceship then blasted its way through space, and for reference, the name of this ship is Nornax. For the aliens on board, they had no idea where it was going to end up, but thanks to the harmony of Maru and Cross's technique, it allows them to find people who are equal. In the end, this harmony is what brought them all the way to Earth, and in 2086, they made contact with humanity. Maru and Cross's technique allows the Simurians to speak any language, and the first country they spoke to was the USA. However, due to the Paranormal Treaty that we mentioned earlier, America told the aliens to speak with Japan instead. This part is where Usami comes in, because in 2086, Usami is the sorcerer with the most responsibility. Officially, his job title is the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and it's said that he handles all the work that used to be done by the big three clans. Right from the start, Usami's goal was to prevent a war with the aliens, and so he tried hard not to do anything that might offend them. In their very first meeting, the Romelians flexed their muscles by bringing Dabura along, and straight away this let everyone know that they have a walking nuke. After this, the aliens made a request for one of their people to go undercover and follow Jujutsu sorcerers on missions. The purpose of this was to learn about the values and the culture of Earth sorcerers, and through this, they'd learn if coexistence is possible. For Usami, he thought the Okkotsu siblings would be the best people for the job, since he believed that their youthful spirit would put humanity in a good light. All of this is what brings us to Modulo Chapter 1, as Yuka, Tsurugi, and Maru were all sent on a mission together. The aim of this mission was to investigate a missing persons case, because recently a bunch of kids had gone missing in Kyoto. Usami's belief was that a curse user has to be involved, and he was 100% correct, because this person had been kidnapping children using his technique. This curse user was highly skilled when it came to barriers, and he used his powers to create a trap that would basically draw people in if they weren't paying attention. At the end of this road, a barrier would teleport people to his location, but the teleportation doesn't work on people who have high curse energy. By adding this rule, it meant that sorcerers wouldn't be able to find him. However, Tsurugi is a special type of sorcerer who has almost no curse energy. This is why he could be teleported to where the kidnapper was, but when he arrived, the barrier had tied his hands behind his back. It also left his sword behind, since the sword had a lot of curse energy, and so at this point, Tsurugi was pretty helpless. Meanwhile, Yuka had no interest in saving him, and she was fully ready to just go home until Maru started shouting at her for leaving her brother behind. For context, at this stage, the Okkotsu kids had a big sibling rivalry, with each one being desperate to prove that they're stronger than the other. In this scene, Yuka was annoyed that he wanted to face the kidnapper alone, because to her, she saw it as disrespect. Ultimately though, Maru convinces Yuka that she'd regret it if she didn't help, and by using harmony, they were able to find Tsurugi. Following that, the Okkotsu siblings messed this guy up, but what's interesting is that Yuka never summoned her Shikigami. This is because the Gojo clan have banned the Ten Shadows technique, I guess for political reasons. Maybe they don't want their next 6-size user to be killed by Yuka, and so Yuka genuinely isn't allowed to use them. What she can do though, is that similar to Sukuna, she's allowed to tap into the Shikigami's powers without summoning the creature itself. In Yuka's case, she uses Divine Dog to transform her hands into these sharp claws before plunging those claws into the curse user. After this, they just kind of assumed he was done, but the curse user had one last trick up his sleeve. In this room, he had dozens of Japanese kids who were all packaged up, and his plan was to sell them to be used for research. The curse user's final trick was to teleport these kids somewhere else, but just before he could do that, Maru intervened. For Simurians, their third eye is the source of their cursed energy, and by using the chaos part of his technique, the curse user was instantly knocked out. However, by going this far, he kind of revealed that he's not human, which is something that was supposed to stay a secret. Up until this point, his third eye had been covered by a plaster, but after seeing it, Tsurugi became suspicious. Although Maru himself didn't confirm anything about being an alien, the Okkotsus did their own investigation, and in the end, they came face to face with Nornax. Recently, the spaceship had been floating above Japan, but most of the time it was invisible thanks to a barrier technique that was similar to a domain. Now, with aliens being confirmed, the siblings knew they had to get stronger since their grandparents weren't around to protect humanity. On the next mission, Tsurugi, Maru, and Yuka were then sent to the countryside where 2 people had been killed by a wild tiger. Just like the Romelians, the tiger had been forced to leave its home, and it was doing what it had to do to survive. Because of that, Maru and this old sorcerer thought there might be a way to help the tiger coexist, but Tsurugi didn't want to take the risk of it hurting anyone else. As a result, he gave the tiger a quick death, and this incident caused Maru to open up. From his point of view, the tiger had a lot in common with the Rumelians, but the key difference is that Rumelians and humans are able to talk. To achieve coexistence, they need to have honest conversations, and so in the spirit of honesty, Maru admits that he was sent to gather info about humans. Unlike his brother, Maru's main goal is for both species to live together in peace, whereas Cross's goal is for a war to break out. With Deborah on their side, Cross felt like they couldn't lose, and he wanted the war to happen because he doesn't trust humanity. We saw proof of this on Maru's next mission after the Simurian was attacked by an insane curse user. For context, this curse user was a senile old man called Masaki, and Masaki was desperate to relive the best time of his life. Now, it just so happens the best time of his life was the first grade, and so he used his technique to shapeshift into his younger self. On its own, this might not sound too bad, but for the last 3 years, he's been killing first graders and their whole families, and then taking their place at school. When confronted by sorcerers, he played innocent for a while, but all hell broke loose when Yuka discovered the bodies. As a curse user, Masaki's skill is on par with a grade 1 sorcerer, and so with help from his Shikigami, he defeated Tsurugi, Yuka, and Maru. However, before he had the chance to do anything else, Maru's unconscious body then started to fight on autopilot. In this scene, Maru himself wasn't in control, instead his third eye seems to take over, and later in the series it's kind of confirmed that the third eye has a mind of its own. Anyway, this third eye used the full potential of chaos, and here are just some of the things that it did to Masaki. Firstly, it sent his mind into a state of confusion, and thanks to this, the cursed user lost control of his Shikigami. Next, Maru threw a rock directly at him, and when Masaki tried to block it, the rock then changed direction and smacked him in the face. Later on, Masaki then got thrown into a swimming pool, and while he was in there, Maru made the water boiling hot. When the cursed user jumped out, Maru turned that same water into frozen ice, and at this point Masaki was trapped. While unconscious, Maru then went in for the kill, and the only reason he didn't succeed is that Tsurugi jumped in to stop him. From Tsurugi's point of view, he thought that if Maru killed this person, then it could start a war between the humans and the aliens. And, if a war was to begin, he didn't want Maru to be responsible. On the flip side, Cross wanted the war as we know, and he was on the sidelines telling Maru to kill Tsurugi. You might be wondering though, why is Cross even here? Number one, it's because the twins share the same curse technique, so Cross knows when his brother uses large amounts of CE. Reason number two is that Harmony makes it very easy to find people, and so Cross showed up when Maru and Masaki were still fighting. From Cross's perspective, the best way to start a war is to kill an innocent person like Tsurugi, and so he didn't care if Maru was the one who did it. Moments later, Tsurugi then got blasted with the full force of chaos, and remember, he was already badly injured from the fight with Masaki. Together, all of this put Tsurugi close to the brink of death, but despite that, he kept trying to remind Maru of his true feelings. Previously, Maru had said that he wanted humans to become his neighbors, and on Simuria, the word neighbors has a special meaning. When Maru and Cross were young, Dura told them that a neighbor is a friend who understands and respects your way of life, even if that way of life might be totally different. Before Tsurugi lost consciousness, he reminded Maru that they're supposed to be neighbors, and when Cross heard this, he couldn't believe it. Instinctively, Cross then jumps down and stopped his brother from killing Tsurugi, although he even admits that he's not sure why he did it. I guess the shock of hearing the word neighbor, it made his body move without thinking, but after this, he basically tells Tsurugi that he still doesn't like humans, and that even if they wanted to be neighbors, he'd say no. Following this, the injured Maru was taken back to Nornax for treatment, and Usami didn't like this since he thought that if the aliens saw Maru was injured, then it'd be bad for the relationship. Speaking of Usami, his curse technique is actually curse speech, although unlike Inumaki, the curse speech markings are on his hand. This means Usami can speak to people like a normal human, and when he needs to use curse speech, he then just talks into his palm. The reason I mention this is that during all of the chaos with Maru and Tsurugi, the curse user managed to slip away. Usami's the one who then chased him into this dark alleyway, and with curse speech, he froze Masaki in place and then destroyed him. Now, while Tsurugi was on the brink of death, he came face to face with Mahito, who's currently residing in the Pathway of Souls. This realm is the place where souls go before they reincarnate, and Mahito had been here since the end of JJK. This whole time, he's been waiting for one specific person to die, and for a moment, he thought that Tsurugi was that person. However, it turned out he had the wrong guy, and after this, Tsurugi wakes up in the hospital. Later that day, Tsurugi, Yuka, and Maru then head to an amusement park, but it turns out the person they thought was Maru was actually Cross in disguise. Even though he doesn't trust humans, he had some small tiny doubts about going to war, and so he pretended to be Maru to learn more about humanity. Pretty quickly though, Yuka realized this wasn't Maru, and the two of them then had a chat about coexistence. As we know, the Remelians have been stolen from and betrayed in the past, and Cross said that after those experiences, it's natural to want to steal something in return. In this case, that means the aliens taking over Japan, but Yuka promised to show him something that would change his mind. The next day, she took Cross with her to a doctor's appointment where the doctor confirmed that Yuka has brain cancer. You heard that right, Yuka has a tumor in her brain, and at 16 years old, she only had 6 months left to live. Now, not only was this very bizarre for Jujutsu Kaisen, but the point she was trying to make to Cross is that they've both been robbed of the futures they were meant to have, and the difference between them is that Yuka's situation can't be changed, whereas the Simurians still have a choice. If Cross starts a war, then it'll lead to an endless cycle of hatred on both sides, but if they try to understand each other, then that might not have to happen. Meanwhile, at Jujutsu HQ, the higher-ups were watching the footage of Maru fighting against Masaki. On the council, there's this annoying guy called Maru who seemingly wants a war with the Simurians, and given that Maru attacks Tsurugi, this technically means that the aliens are now a threat. However, Usami played the Uno reverse card because, according to the Hakari provision, Maru's fight with Tsurugi was totally legal. Remember, under this provision, sorcerers can be hired to fight, and before the last mission, Usami made Maru, Tsurugi, and Yuta sign contracts with him. In that sense, any fight between them is legal under the provision, although Maru points out that Maru wasn't approved by Jujutsu HQ. In response, Usami argued that Maru is a latent sorcerer, which is someone who uses Jujutsu by accident without realizing it. Usually, latent sorcerers aren't punished for their crimes, since the damage they caused was purely accidental. By this point, Maru was pretty pissed off, because Usami was going out of his way to side with the aliens. Maru's belief is that the aliens think they're a lot stronger than humanity and that they can just take over whenever they want, but what they don't know is that humans have a secret weapon. This secret weapon is Yuji Itadori, and by demonstrating Yuji's power, the aliens would learn to respect humanity. Sadly for Maru, no one knows where Yuji is, and Usami basically warns him not to drag them into a war. Anyhow, on the Nornax, the aliens had a vote to decide on their next move, and despite his personal feelings, Cross voted to coexist. In his own words, after everything they've been through, he just felt tired, and so for now, this was the best option. As the leader of the group, Deborah also agreed, and soon both sides started to organize a special dinner where they could learn about each other's cultures. In the lead up to this event, the Okkotsu kids learnt about Kalians and a little bit of Rumelian culture, while Usami found out that the Nornux is powered by cursed energy. For obvious reasons, this was a massive deal, because if other countries found out about this tech, then the hunt for Japanese people would be on the rise. Therefore, Usami's goal was to keep this a secret, and to do this, they had to build an incredibly close relationship with the Rumelians. Luckily for Usami, there were two things that made this possible. Number one, on the night of the special dinner, this human chef and Deborah seemed to fall in love. This lady's name is Kyoko, and she works full-time at Jujutsu High, and yeah, her and Deborah had an instant connection. The second thing is that, as we know, Deborah's sister has been tainted with a death curse, but Usami offered them a way to break it. Somewhere in Africa, there's a cursed tool known as the Black Rope, and although it takes a very long time to make, if the Japanese could get their hands on it, then they'd be able to save Deborah's sister. Deborah himself couldn't believe that something like this exists, so if the humans made it happen, then the Simurians would definitely owe them one. Unfortunately, all of those good vibes didn't even last a day, because later that same night, the aliens discovered something terrible. Until now, nobody had realized just how similar Kalians were to cursed spirits, but on the Nornax, this old guy was the first to notice. As you can see, there were tears coming from his third eye, and this happens to Rumelians when they see a Kalian get killed. Usually, the tears have a negative effect on the body, and in certain cases, it can be fatal. On the Nornax, this old guy saw a Kalian being murdered in Tokyo, but it wasn't actually a Kalian, it was a cursed spirit, and ultimately, this is what led to the big conflict. In November of 2086, a few aliens went into Tokyo without permission in order to investigate the Kalians. At the same time, Maru and some other sorcerers were in the same location, taking part in the Great Purification Ritual. We explained earlier, this ritual is all about destroying cursed spirits, and as you'd expect, the Rumelians didn't like that. In one panel, Yakumaru was ready to shoot them with his cursed energy gun, but at the last moment, Usami and Cross showed up just in time. Using cursed speech, Usami stopped Yakumaru from doing anything stupid, while Cross explained to his people that curses are not Kallians. For a while, this was enough to calm the situation, but on both sides, you had people who wanted to take a more aggressive approach. Then, in a moment of pure racism, Yakumaru shoots Cross because he allegedly thought that he was reaching for his sword. To be fair, he is reaching for something, but, obviously it wasn't his sword. He wasn't trying to cut everyone down here. There was something he was trying to get. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was his iPhone, I don't know. But the point is, Yakumaru shoots Cross. This moment is when relations broke down between humans and Simurians, and here's 3 things you need to know about the fallout. Number 1, Yakumaru's arm got vaporized by Deborah, and Usami also nearly got killed trying to help him. To be specific, Usami used cursed speech to try and freeze Deborah in place, but Deborah's strength was just so overwhelming that the blowback sent him into a coma. Number 2, after being shot, Cross also went into a coma, with no guarantee that he'd ever wake up. Although the humans do have someone who knows reverse curse technique, she can't heal severe tissue damage, which is likely what happened in both situations. 3. The Simurians requested that Japan stops killing cursed spirits, and initially Japan did stop. The problem is that naturally they can't stop forever, because if the number of spirits grew too much, then they would start spilling out of Tokyo. In December of 2086, humans then returned to killing curses, but they did these killings at nighttime in order to hide it from the aliens. Despite that, an alien called Otsuki was monitoring the situation, and this guy is one of the strongest Rumelian warriors. Even from space, he could tell that spirits were being destroyed, and so in January of 2087, the Simurians made a request. To put it simply, the aliens wanted full control of Tokyo for themselves, and if the humans didn't agree, then they'd settle things in a one-on-one duel. Remember, duels are how arguments get solved in Discunte culture, and since Deborah is in charge, this was his chosen method. According to one of the higher-ups, Yuji is the only person on Earth who should face Deborah, but right now they still had no idea where he was. After speaking with Nobara, she revealed that the last time she saw Yuji was at Hana's funeral, and that after that he basically disappeared. The thing about Yuji is that for a long time he hasn't been able to age, and this is the result of him eating the 6 death paintings. Doing this basically turned Itadori into a death painting himself, and as we've seen, their lifespan is way longer than a normal human. For Yuji, this messed with his head, because firstly, he saw most of his friends die, including Hana, Megumi, Yuta, Maki, and probably some others, while he stayed exactly the same age. Secondly, Yuji was self-conscious about how people perceived him, and he said that, he didn't want people to see him as some kind of monster. That's why he just vanished without saying a word to anyone, and so humanity couldn't rely on him for this duel. For that reason, Yuka was asked to take his place, and since she was going to die anyway, she agreed to do it. As a user of the 10 Shadows, she had Mahoraga up her sleeve, and although she hadn't tamed him, it was still their best shot of winning. To increase their chances, Yuka also entered a death binding vow, which has been described as the quickest way for a sorcerer to raise their level. Yuka's vow is that she would die once Mahoraga's ritual was complete, and in exchange, her technique received a boost that improved both his healing and his adaptation. Anyhow, on the 14th of January 2087, Deborah arrived in Tokyo and waited for the duel to begin. At this stage, he had no idea who his opponent would be, and for a moment, he thought he was up against Wiwi. As a youngster, Wiwi was one of the main people who helped to defeat Sukuna, and now, 69 years later, he was excited to watch Deborah reach that level. More than that, he wanted his grandkids to know what true power looks like, and during this speech, you can see there was a plane flying overhead. On this plane was Yuka, who was preparing to jump out, but physically speaking, she wasn't doing too good. Even though she was supposed to have months left to live, her tumor had progressed rapidly to the point where she could barely see in front of herself. For a second, she even thought that Mino was her brother, and for context, Mino is Usami's assistant. Now, despite what Yuka said earlier in the series, in her final moments she wasn't really thinking about her grandfather's ring. Instead, all she cared about was that in her next life, she wanted Tsurugi to be her older brother again. While it's true that he did suck at certain things, he was still a good brother in the times when it really mattered. Following this, Yuka then skydives out the plane, and just before hitting the concrete, she summons the Divine General. Yuka herself then dipped into the shadows, leaving Deborah to face Mahoraga alone. It's worth pointing out that on Simoria, Shikigami don't exist, so this was his first time seeing anything like this. To end the fight quickly, Deborah whipped out his curse technique, which has two elements. The first is that he can produce light out of his body, and the second is that he combines this light with a murderous intent. This murderous intent is described as having a tangible solid form, and on Earth nothing like it exists. Anyhow, with this power, Deborah stabs Mahoraga with a bunch of lightsabers, and for most victims this would be a one-shot kill. However, obviously Mahoraga is built different, and in this panel we see him chewing one of the lightsabers in half. From this moment, he began adapting to Deborah's technique, and as we know, the more hits that he takes, the faster the adaptation becomes. On top of that, his stats were amped up thanks to the death binding vow, so Deborah was in trouble here even though he didn't realize it. Next, these two special grades then had an epic battle across Tokyo, with Deborah blasting Mahoraga to shreds, only for him to instantly come back. Gradually, this led to Mahoraga's complete and full adaptation, meaning the murderous light now did 0 damage. For Deborah's entire life, he never needed to use anything more than this, and he even once said that he barely has to try. Despite that, Dura told him that one day he'd face someone who'd give him a proper challenge, and on that day, that's when Deborah would become a true warrior. Now that his light didn't work, he knew he had to think of a different solution, and the plan he came up with was to use brute force. His plan was to push his body beyond its limits by using the light part of his technique to rapidly speed himself up. Deborah's aim was to travel as close to light speed as humanly possible, regardless of the damage that it would do to his own flesh. As he then got closer to light speed, Deborah's foot started to burn up, but before it got wrecked, he used it to kick Mahoraga. In chapter 19 of Modulo, the impact seemed like a nuke was going off, and this kick was enough to vaporize the Divine General. When we look here, the only body part left was this, which I'm assuming is like a tiny little bit of his spine, and this should have been game over. However, because Mahoraga is him, he fully came back from this, and Deborah was now fully enjoying the challenge. At the same time, nearby, a different battle was going on between Maru and Tsurugi. As Yuka's older brother, Tsurugi wanted her to live her final days in peace, and so he wasn't happy with the idea of her fighting a special grade alien. Therefore, to save his sister, he needed Deborah to leave Earth, and this is where things get slightly complicated. In the ritual to tame Mahoraga, there were 3 participants who are Yuka, Deborah, and Mahoraga himself. Due to her binding vow, Yuka is already in a state of suspended death, meaning she's out the game and will die when the ritual is complete. Importantly though, the ritual will only be complete if Mahoraga is killed or Deborah is killed. This means that if Deborah was to vanish and leave the range of the 10 shadows, then the ritual wouldn't be complete. Instead, the ritual would be void. A voided ritual means that Yuka's binding vow would also be voided, and she'd be able to live out her final days in peace. Because of that, Tsurugi challenged Maru to a duel, and if he wins, then Deborah has to go back to Simoria. On the flip side, Maru knew that Deborah can't go back to their home planet, because if he did, then he'd be within the range of the Chief's curse technique. Remember, if Deborah disobeys the Chief, then his sister will die, so sending him back to Simoria isn't something Maru would do. This disagreement is why these two were fighting, and early on Tsurugi dominated him, partly thanks to the training he received from Maki. The one problem for Tsurugi is that Maru was holding back out of fear that he would kill his friend. However, in this scene, Maru's third eye convinces him to go all out, cause on Simoria, a true warrior uses his full power. After activating his chaos technique, Maru then tosses Tsurugi around and pummels him with the weight of about 6 or 7 buses. In normal circumstances, this would have been the end of the battle, however, this is when Yuta's ring kicks in. We mentioned earlier that the ring contains decades worth of curse energy from Yuta, as well as the will of Rika Orimoto. Although Rika's actual soul passed away 70 years ago, the shell she left behind is likely what's inside the ring. Now, in this scene, she made Tsurugi an offer to help him win, and once he said yes, he got access to Yuta's curse energy stockpile. This stockpile is the one for all of the JJK universe, as it has a basically infinite supply of curse energy, and it meant that even when Maru used chaos, Tsurugi was unaffected. He also got this stylish Rika helmet which has Rika's consciousness inside, and throughout the fight she was just yapping non-stop. Elsewhere in Tokyo, thousands of curses were trying to escape the city because of Deborah, but Jujutsu HQ had severely underestimated how many there'd be. Initially, their plan was to adjust the barrier in Tokyo so that fleeing cursed spirits would be guided towards the ocean. However, they did a crappy job according to one person, and to make things worse, the team they sent to handle stray curses came face to face with a gang of Rumelians. If nothing was done, these two sides would have killed each other, and then war would have broken out regardless of what happened with Deborah. Thankfully, it was at this crucial moment that Yuji finally appeared to stop the two sides from fighting. From outside this building, he released a burst of piercing blood that then split off into different sections, and this blood targeted both the Earth Sorcerers and the Simurians. Because he's like a death painting, Yuji's blood is poisonous, hence why he knocked everyone out, but according to him, everyone would be fine in a few days. The one exception is Otsuki, who managed to avoid the piercing blood, and so for him, Yuji had to use a different method. As you can see in this panel, Otsuki swung at him with an axe, but Yuji repelled the axe by firing off these mini slashes out of his hand. These tiny slashes prevented the axe from reaching him, and so in that sense, he has his own version of Limitless. Back in the day, Sukuna did something similar against Yuta, and I'm assuming that Yuji took inspiration from this and over the decades managed to refine that skill. Following that, he then smashed Otsuki with a black flash, making him the only person in history who can just do this at will. At this stage, as a sorcerer, Yuji has fulfilled 100% of his potential, but mentally speaking, his belief is that he doesn't matter anymore. After all, he probably should have died by now, and so in his words, he doesn't like to meddle with the present. That's why he allowed the next generation to fight Deborah, but he did say that if Yuka was to lose, then he would jump in. Following this, Yuji then walked off to deal with the spirits fleeing Tokyo, and with a single dismantle, he blew up a huge chunk of the city. In this panel, you can see there were actually two giant blasts, but only one of these belongs to Itadori. The second blast was thanks to Rika and Tsurugi, because just seconds earlier, Tsurugi got his hands on the Soul Split Katana. He got this weapon right as a stream of curses appeared behind Maru, and Rika encouraged Tsurugi to just swing as hard as he could. His strength was then boosted by Rika herself, who gave him extra cursed energy, and the result was a slash on par with Yuji. This was a very clever move because, like I mentioned before, Rumelians have a physical reaction when Kallians are killed. Although Kallians and cursed spirits aren't exactly the same, they're similar enough that when this many spirits get massacred, it gives Maru a ton of blowback. Immediately after this, Tsurugi made a binding vow that increased his speed, but in exchange, he gave up access to his grandfather's cursed energy. The first time I read this, I also assumed that he gave up access to his own cursed energy, so that he's now just an empty vessel like Toji and Maki, but I don't want to say that for certain, because I'm honestly not 100% sure. Either way, the fact is, Tsurugi is now faster than before, and with this speed, he had an opening to finish Maru. However, at the very last moment, Tsurugi drops his sword on the ground, and the reason he did this was pretty interesting. When he was young, Maki told Tsurugi that people like them get stronger by losing things. At the same time, she warned him that the loss won't always be worth it, and that sometimes you'll lose things that you probably should have kept. In Maki's case, she wiped out the whole Zenin clan thanks to Mai's death, but for the rest of her life, she wondered if someone else could have done it. The point Maki was making is that she wished there was a reality where she could have accomplished her goal without losing Mai, and for Tsurugi, he wanted to save Yuka without losing his friend. In his words, he felt like a future where he won wouldn't be the right outcome, and his hesitation is what allowed the alien to slice through him. Almost instantly, Maru regretted doing this, and the reason he's crying here is that he wants to resolve their differences, but he just didn't know how. I have to be honest, from this point, the pacing of Modulo gets a bit insane, so let's try to break things down step by step. Firstly, as Maru sits here confused about how to fix things, the Nornak shines brightly as if it's responding to Maru's wishes. The next time we see Maru, he's then on the spaceship with Yuji as they discuss how to coexist. You might be wondering though, how did these two end up in the same room? Well, Maru's wish is for humans and Rumelians to live in harmony, and so his techniques summon the people to make that happen. What's crazy is Maru himself doesn't know who Itadori is, but in this panel, he says, "My technique thought you would be appropriate." That's right, the harmony technique genuinely has a mind of its own, and it brought Yuji here to help create a world for both humans and Rumelians. Given that cursed spirits are the reason that both sides don't get along, Maru's aim was to get rid of every curse on the planet, and also to stop curses being born in the future. Doing that would allow everyone to live in harmony, and it is possible if you combine the cursed energy in Yuta's ring, the mole inside the Nornax, Maru's harmony, and idol transfiguration. Like we said earlier, Mahito has been waiting in the Pathway of Souls, aka the place where Earthling souls go after death. Maru's harmony gives him access to this realm even without being dead, and this allowed Yuji and Mahito to have their final reunion. Back in 2018, Mahito put this man through absolute hell by killing Junpei, Nanami, and seemingly Nobara as well, so you'd understand if Yuji was angry to see him. Instead, Itadori laughed and didn't really care, because he's lived a whole life since then, whereas Mahito had just been stuck in the past. For all these decades, Mahito had been waiting specifically for Yuji to die, but number one, Yuji still isn't dead, and number two, he's obviously changed a lot since he was 16. This version of Itadori is a Sukuna level threat, and his job is to defeat Mahito in this space. For a bit of context, Maru's plan is to use idol transfiguration to alter the souls of all Japanese people, and by doing this, cursed spirits will no longer be born. If you remember, this is because spirits are mainly born from the Japanese people leaking cursed energy, but there are two ways that idol transfiguration can fix that. The first option is to remove cursed energy from the population, and the second option is to turn everyone in the country into a sorcerer. In Season 3, you might remember that Megumi asked Tengen about why Kenjaku didn't use idol transfiguration to turn the entire country into sorcerers, and Tengen simply replied by saying Kenjaku didn't have enough cursed energy. However, the reason Maru can do it is that he has access to Yuta's infinite cursed energy, and also the mole from his home planet. These two things can boost Maru's technique and allow him to manipulate the entire country. To make it happen though, one of them has to defeat Mahito in a fair fight, which is why Maru's harmony technique gave Mahito access to his normal power levels. On top of that, because they're in the Pathway of Souls, it means that Mahito has full control over the environment itself. As a result, he transforms the place into Shibuya for obvious reasons, and he uses everything at his disposal to crush Yuji. In response, Yuji dices him up without ever taking his hands out of his pockets, and you can see in this panel, dismantles are flying in every direction. For me, this was my favorite image of the entire sequel series. It's just so cool, so much aura, so much hype, and you know Mahito was never expecting this. The last time they saw each other, Yuji didn't even have a cursed technique. After this, Mahito is then transformed into a cursed object by Maru's technique, and these two discuss what they plan to do next. To cut a long story short, they decide to remove cursed energy from both the Japanese and the Rumelians, but this will only apply to future generations. In other words, current Jujutsu sorcerers will keep their powers, but their children will have almost no cursed energy, just like the rest of the world. According to Yuji, all humans need a tiny bit of cursed energy just to keep their bodies running, and the only exception is people with heavenly restrictions. This means it's not possible to fully remove cursed energy like they thought, because they'd have to give heavenly restrictions to billions of people. To put it simply, that's impossible, so the next best thing is to remove as much cursed energy as possible from the Japanese and the Rumelians. Doing that means only a small handful of spirits will be born each year, and Itadori has a plan to kill those future curses. However, Maru points out that this will still lead to conflict between humans and Rumelians, and so Yuji basically tells him to find out why curses are so similar to Kallians. After looking into it, Maru discovers that Kallians, curses, and Rumelians have souls that are the same color, and this is a brand new concept. Apparently, every soul in the universe has a specific color, and creatures that share the same color have a natural affinity for each other. This is why Rumelians are the only ones who don't get hurt by Kallians or cursed spirits, since their souls are the same color. That being said, in order to create a future where humans and Rumelians can live in harmony, Maru decides to change the color of all future souls. Using Mahito's technique, he reshapes the Pathway of Souls so that when souls arrive here, their colors will now be scattered. That's how it was described in the official translation, and by the sounds of it, it sounds like all new souls on Earth will receive colors at random. For example, let's imagine that right now, all humans have red souls and all Rumelians have green souls. In the future, every individual will have a random color, so there won't be any difference between groups. This solution means that when curses do pop up, humans can kill them without the Rumelians getting upset. With that sorted, Itadori then leaves to start working on his grand plan, while Maru deals with everything else. The first thing Maru does is he interrupts Deborah's fight with Mahoraga, and by this point, Deborah was having the time of his life, having unlocked reverse curse technique reversal, and a domain expansion. Regardless, Maru ruined the fun by stepping in, as he then teleports Deborah to Africa so he can get some of the black robe. This rope is what he needed to break his sister's curse, and now that they had it, it was safe for him to go home. Because it's only 2 people, Maru has the power to send them back instantly, and when Deborah gets back home, he kills the chief and takes charge. That being said, he admits he doesn't know much about politics, so as the new chief, his main policy is to build a shrine for Dura. Now, back on Earth, Deborah leaving meant that Maharaga's ritual was void, and like we said before, if the ritual is void, that means Yuka's death-binding vow is void as well. Then, using idol transfiguration, Maru fully healed her brain tumor while also healing Usami, Tsurugi, and Cross, who'd been in a coma since the day he got shot. In the Pathway of Souls, Maru then gets ready to complete the ritual, and for context, the ritual will do 3 things. First, it will stop all sorcerers from being born on Earth in the future, while at the same time changing the color of their souls and wiping out every curse that's currently on the planet. Just as he was about to do this, the souls of Cross, Tsurugi, and Yuka then appeared next to him, and I'm assuming this happened because Harmony must have realized that Maru was scared to do this by himself. Following this, every single curse on the planet peacefully passes away, creating a brand new world for everyone. In the final chapter of Modulo, Yuka and Tsurugi then get scolded by their mother since they both went off to fight aliens in Tokyo against her wishes, and Yuka had kept her illness a secret until the very last moment. Despite that, she said she was still incredibly proud of them for what they did, and she believed that Yuta, Maki, and Iori would feel the same. This might be a reach, but the fact she put Iori's name in the same sentence as the dead Maki and Yuta, it implies to me that she might know something that we don't. Regardless, when it comes to the Rumelians, they had a really tough decision to make because right now on their ship there were 52 Kallians. The problem with these Kallians is that because of what Maru did, future generations of Rumelians will have different colored souls, meaning they'll likely be attacked by the Kallians. Even so, the Rumelians made the choice to keep living with these creatures because after thousands of years, there was no way they were going to kill them or just abandon them. Lastly, after a very long time, Yuji shows up at Nobura's house to discuss plans to deal with future cursed spirits. In his hand, he brought Panda along with him because after ghosting Kugasaki for so long, he felt like Panda's presence would make things less awkward. By this stage of the timeline, Yuji had realized he made a mistake by trying to avoid the present. For that reason, he really wanted her help to deal with the future cursed spirits. In total, Itadori's plan has 4 steps. Number 1, they have to teach current sorcerers about complex barrier techniques, and hopefully they can make a barrier that can maintain itself even after sorcerers are gone. This new barrier would be based on the ones we saw from Tengen, and would hopefully work to destroy curses before they get too powerful. Number 2, they need to track down every person with Heavenly Restriction and the rest of their bloodline, because in a world without sorcerers, these people will be the best for fighting curses. Number 3, they need to start mass producing curse tools, things like split soul katanas and glasses that help you see spirits. Finally, number 4, Itadori has to figure out how to become a cursed object, similar to how Sukuna and Kenjaku once figured it out themselves. If Yuji can do this, then when he dies in around 300 years' time, his soul will become stored inside of his corpse. That way, if humans really need curse energy once again, then someone in the future can eat Yuji's corpse and gain his power in the process. This would be useful if future aliens try to invade Earth, or if the Earth just runs out of fuel, because with the right tech and, the right mull, curse energy can be enough to power nations. To be fair, Usami was actually concerned about this, since he believed that if humans found out that Maru removed curse energy and essentially removed their hope of using it as a fuel source, then it'd lead to racism against the Rumelians. That's why, for now, they're keeping it a secret that no more sorcerers will be born, and in the background, there was one person making certain moves to give the aliens a good reputation. That person was Wiwi, who leaked confidential information to the public. Remember, people aren't supposed to know that aliens are here, but what Wiwi did is he recorded the footage of Deborah's fight with Maharaga and then sent it to TMZ, or a station that's like TMZ. This channel then showed the footage, claiming that Deborah is an alien who fights for justice, since he protected Japan from the same demon that fought Satoru Gojo. With that said, Modulo then ends with humans and Rumelians playing catch, as Maru, Tsurugi, and everyone else try to learn more about each other. Oh yeah, on the final page, it's also implied that Deborah came back to Earth to see his chef girlfriend, and I wouldn't be surprised by this because when we look at the color page here, he is locked in on her. Anyway, people, that was the full story of Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo, and let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already if you want to see more videos like this. As always, thank you for watching till the end, and until the next one, peace out.